Right, okay, so one of the things that I thought it might be interesting to explore is this whole idea about positive thinking, because you see so much about it. It's a big trend. What's your take on that? I'm interested to hear what you think about positive thinking.
Well, first of all, positive thinking is nothing new. I mean, Norman Vincent Peale wrote a book, The Power of Positive Thinking, 70 years ago. And if you go back through American history, there have been always people who have been preaching the value of thinking positively. I mean, some of the early American folk songs are keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side, keep on the sunny side of life. So people think it's some brand new trend. It's actually not.
Right.
Well, the power of, and to think about positive thinking means I should always, if I listen to the gurus and the so-called experts, I should always maintain an attitude of gratitude.
Yeah, I've heard that
day,
so many times. Yes.
And the first thing I do up in the morning is I think of 3 people in my life to feel grateful for. And the last thing I go to bed at night, I write down 3 things I have to be grateful for. And I should always be kind to everybody, right? Yeah. I should think kind thoughts and find ways to express kindness to people. And on and on and on. There's lots of, examples of what positive thinking, looks like.
Yeah.
But for me, the trouble is with positive thinking is that if that's the right way to be, then what it does is it makes wrong when I think unpositive thoughts.
Yeah.
So if I have thoughts that are not kind, if I have thoughts that are angry, if I have thoughts that are resentful, if I have thoughts that are, that are jealous, if I have thoughts of hatred, if I feel like, damn, I'd like to punch that guy, all those thoughts, which are totally normal feelings that every human being has. Yeah. They're totally normal, right? So if the power of positive thinking movement says, no, can't feel those ways. Right. Wrong, they make them wrong. Yeah. It's wrong to have anger. It's wrong to have hatred. It's wrong to feel ungrateful. It's wrong to be unkind to people. And anything I make wrong, then, if I'm going to, we all want to be a good person, so I have to suppress it.
Right.
And it's no secret that when I suppress anger or hatred or, feelings of revenge or jealousy, they don't go away. Yeah. In fact, the more I suppress them, the more they build up, and over time, sooner or later, they're going to find a way to come out. And often, if I suppress them long enough, they come out in twisted or even perverted ways.
Well, they tend to come out in an enlarged way.
Yeah, exactly.
And in
an exaggerated way.
And inappropriate times.
Right, exactly right. And so the guy who goes into the post office and mows down 15 people, without a feeling of remorse, is somebody who has a lot of suppressed anger.
It's not just anger, though, is it? I mean, it's interesting what you say. I mean, if I think about in my own life as well, it's also can be sadness. So I shouldn't be sad. Sad's wrong. Mustn't feel like that. So I kind of push it down. I'm going to be strong. Right. But actually,
always be happy.
It doasn't go away.
No.
And then because I've done that, then it just comes out at strange times, and I have some tears. I mean, what am I concerned about? But it just forces its way out. So it's that, with that piece about positivity in general, it's that pressure you should be like that.
Right.
There's a certain way that you should be. And as soon as whatever you say after that, however you finish that sentence, there's a pressure because it's implying that there's a wrong way to be. That it should not be like that. And that's that tension that people get caught between. That's what I see that a lot in my coaching. I'm like this, but HR's told me I should be like that. And good luck with that.
Right. And so it goes back to the fundamental premise of all of our work, which is what I resist persists. The more I fight against something, the more, in fact, I give it power. Right. I give it power over me. What I resist doesn't go away. Right? gets buried and it goes underground. And so what I resist, actually, I'm stuck with, you know? And so you can, in fact, another aspect of it that Ken Wilber writes about really, really beautifully in the spectrum of consciousness is that when I suppress something like hatred or anger, then I will project it onto others.
Yeah.
And so what I end up having to suppress in myself because I don't want to feel it and I don't want anybody to know that I feel it, you know, because I want to be a good person, I'm then going to project it onto others.
Right.
And when I see that in you, I'm going to get angry at you. I'm going to resist you. I'm not going to like you. I'm going to distance myself from you.
Yeah.
So positive thinking is a source of to me what is the cause of, you know, the worst atrocities in the whole world, which is I project my own self-hatred onto somebody else. Then I want to destroy my projection. I don't just resist it. I want to.
Yeah.
So the history of the world is full of people thinking they're saving the world by purifying it and getting rid of evil people, when what they're doing is attacking their own projection, you know, attacking what they hate in themselves in other people.
Yeah.
So that's an extreme example, but the power of positive thinking is I suppress what I don't like about myself, and I end up projecting it onto you.
Yeah.
I mean, I end up projecting it onto people around me.
Yeah. And I think the context of that in general is something that's grown and continues to grow in today's world, which is, as I say, there's a right way to be, and it's almost at the end of the spectrum. It's like, it's not just that positivity can be good, which it can. It's not like it's inherently bad, but I've got to be it. I've got to do that, and I've got to do that all the time. And so then that takes you towards virtue signaling and all these things about, it's so important for me to be seen, not just here on the spectrum, but here on the spectrum. And if I'm here on the spectrum today, then tomorrow I've got to be there. And I think, you know, that's a increasingly big trend that, again, I see when I'm working with people in all fields, to be honest.
And it makes people, it polarizes
exactly
people. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I end up hating the things in other people that are actually going on in me.
Yeah.
Right.
So what you're saying, and I would absolutely echo, is this actually, rather than, let's take anger, you were talking about that earlier, as opposed to kind of pushing it down, I shouldn't be angry, I've got to be positive. What, in the way that we work with people, is more to allow that, to legitimize that. If you are experiencing anger, then experience the anger. That doesn't mean you go in and you start, you know, screaming and shouting at people, or with sadness I spoke about earlier. It doesn't mean you're a flood of tears on the floor, but you do find ways to allow those feelings to be there. And as you do that, as you allow yourself to experience them, that's when they actually dissipate in that
Exactly,
sense.
right.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is so Fritz Perls is famous for saying, if I experience something fully and completely, then, right, it will go, that won't instantly vanish, but it will dissipate and it will, you know, will lessen. And the more I allow myself to fully experience something, right, and integrate it into it's okay to feel angry.
Yeah.
Right? I don't act on it. I don't hurt people. I don't hurt myself. But it's, you know, but I accept it. You know, to me, one of the best things that was ever said about this is what Carl Rogers said. When I accept myself, he said, the curious paradox is when I accept myself as I am, I change.
Yeah.
So when I accept, like just exactly what you're saying, when I accept myself, my anger, then I'm no longer, right? I'm no longer caught in that struggle of trying to force myself to be nice and having anger erupt.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It loses its power over me through self-acceptance.
Yeah.
So Jung said the same thing. Self-acceptance is the key of, you know, the real key to wholeness. Yeah,
and I think you said something there that I think is also important within that. So absolutely that, and I accept my anger. So in that statement, that linguistically is I'm saying I have anger, not I am angry. You see, and this leads into one of my, as you know, one of my favorite subjects, which is identity and how I see myself. Because as soon as I say I am angry, I mean, it's like saying I am 6'2". It's like, well, you're done. Now you're done. You can put a bow on it. And it's very difficult then, or I am sad. It just lives with people like it's a fact, an assertion. And now now it becomes difficult because it's kind of part of me. And so it's almost like I need to take my arm off. I need to take the anger off. And once I start to see myself, I'm an angry person. The number of times I've had people give me coaching briefs like HR told me I've got an anger problem. You know, so, and when we talk about it, it's yeah, I am angry. And that, so linguistically, straight away, you've really hit a dead end. And it's very difficult to work through that for as long as people are identified with it.
So I have anger is different.
I am experiencing it. I have it.
I'm experiencing
and then
anger.
I can begin to separate. So I'm over here. I am experiencing it. I'm not pretending I don't, but I am not my anger. As soon as I am my anger, or that's just kind of, when I was born, I had the kind of A chip put on my head. There's nowhere to go with that, really. And one of the big ahas for people in that is often a simple question, which often throws people, which is, well, what's the benefit in getting angry? Because they've been seeing anger as a problem. And then you go, well, hang on. Why you keep doing it, then you must be getting something. And for a lot of people, that is a real aha journey of exploration when they say, actually, anger's not a problem in that sense, and it's not who I am. It's actually a strategy that I've developed over many years, and it's given me some good stuff. Yeah. Now, if you are willing to approach it like that, get curious about that, it can open up some very, very, very powerful doorways, I think.
Well, anger is very useful sometimes. I mean, to stand up for myself if I'm, if there's a situation where I'm being taken advantage of and treated unfairly. So if I have no access, if I push my anger down far enough and made it so wrong that I become wimpy, I become weak, I become, a pushover. Whereas if I can access my anger at appropriate, like you're saying, in appropriate ways, then I have power. Yeah. And I mean, anger is one of the sources of power, as are all those kinds of, feelings. Yeah. That if I have to squash them all, I take away from my personal power significantly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So if I can't have access to them because, I haven't made them so wrong that, that I'm wrong if I access them, then I have a significant amount of more personal power, Yeah.
So one of my interests, and I think it's become increasingly so, the more work that I've done in this field, and I'd be very interested to hear your point of view on this, is the idea I spoke about in the book, Start With Who, which is, it's based in this idea of context versus content. But in particular, in the field of leadership, this context of my identity, who I've decided I am, who other people experience me as. I'm interested, any thoughts around that in terms of how that plays out for people in terms of producing results or being effective in life?
So by identity, you mean how I define myself, how I present myself to other people?
Yeah.
Well, to me, I've done a lot of work, as you know, on assisting people to be authentic.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this is relevant to what you're talking about or not.
Relevant. Yes.
But in the work that I do and that you do also, I know, we often have people identify the image that they develop in order to be accepted. Yeah. Which is a kind of like a mask that we wear. Jung called it a persona, which means the mask that actors in Rome wore to hide their, when they were a character in a play. So we all develop, as we grow up, a an image in order to be accepted, in order to be loved, in order to be fit in order to be approved of by mom and dad,
Yeah.
especially by mom and dad.
Yeah.
And we need to suppress parts of ourselves to fit in.
Yeah.
There are parts of ourselves that we're taught are not acceptable. Everything from the stuff we were just talking about, anger and hatred and jealousy and especially violence. Taught from a little age, don't hit your sister, don't hit your brother, don't be mean to the dog. And we're taught to suppress our violent feelings and anything that doesn't fit in. And we're also taught to suppress our excitement and our aliveness.
Absolutely.
And because little kids are excited and alive.
Well, I'm British and you're American,
Right,
so
and
we have different versions of that.
The British are especially good at this.
We're very good at that.
But all human beings, we learn to suppress not just our, quote, negative qualities, but ones that, our excitement, our aliveness, our passion, our sexuality, And so it can be confusing because I can more and more and more think of, that image that I developed, which largely happens at an early age, becomes an unconscious self, an unconscious identity.
It's who I am.
Right. And I think that's who I am. And so it masks, for me, it masks important aspects of myself that I've had to control and make, and hide and make wrong. And so to me, I'm not sure if this is what you're after, though.
No.
Identity for me is bringing forth those parts of myself that I've suppressed and giving them, making them part of me, not doing away with, what I've learned, but integrating it, as we were talking about before.
I think that's part of it. I think absolutely. I think, and I can feel it in myself as much as anyone I'm working with. There are parts of myself that I know and I've suppressed over time, and I can see where that's come from, etc. And so, and again, what happens with that, therefore, there's a temptation to always be a certain way. And so now I have to be like that, because if I'm not like that, then people will see that I'm like this.
Right, exactly.
And it's also, but I think there's another part to that, which is also this piece of when I'm young and I'm very dependent. So when I'm very young, I'm very dependent on mummy and daddy. And then what happens is I realize that I get rewarded, and I get love and I get attention maybe. And so as an example, some people, and I certainly see myself in this in my upbringing, I knew I could get love and attention and recognition from mummy and daddy by getting the answer right, by being smart, by learning, by practicing, by learning, by studying, coming home with a good report card. That became the one way to do that. And so one of the things that I can see, and I see this a lot played out many, many times in corporations, and as I say, I see it myself too, which is a lot of people have that kind of good schoolboy, good schoolgirl image, and that makes sense because back then that's what I needed to show in order to get that. But what a big part of the book, and one of the reasons I wrote it, I think, is the limitations of that, because now that's been a very good strategy to get me from being that dependent child to being independent. Because now look, Mum, look, Dad, I know stuff. Look at me, I can do this. I can go out in the world, and it kind of proves to them and to me that I'm smart in this example. The problem is, over time, and it's true in the world, but it's especially clear in business, as I get promoted, it's not just about me. And so now I'm moving from this game of I've been dependent, I've got to independence through showing how smart I am, for example. But then I'm asked, and the business asks me, and the world asks me actually to acknowledge that actually it's an interdependent game. And now I've got a problem, because all the things that used to work, which is showing how much I know, and look at me, I know this and I know that.
Right.
Now I've got a problem because by doing that, it's not allowing space with other people. So it's beginning to have impacts on other people, so that when I'm trying to produce results with and through others, what worked for me in the past is now in my way at that level. And that's one of the biggest things that I deal with, is that shift from dependence to independence is fine, but then from independence to interdependence is a huge barrier for people, because it's almost like they have to reverse. It's almost like the willingness to say, hey, I don't know everything. And as you know, and you'll know this, further up you go in life, but also in business, you can't know everything. You don't know as much as, but some people get stuck on, no, I do know. I have to show I know, and I know this and I know that. And actually, if you really want to have people come with you, being interdependent, sometimes it's that willingness to hold your hand up and say, I don't know. But of course, that's completely counter to what gave me the independence in the first place. Right. And now I've got a problem. And I think that's really a fascinating part of the journey for human beings. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is the identity issue, which is it is who I am. This is the way I was, is the way I am, and it's the way I will always be. And it gets very fixed for people. And then it becomes very difficult. So, you've worked in the world of development longer than me, but you'll know this as well. The key context or frame is really, who do I believe I can become? I'm not really going to go anywhere if I don't believe I can grow into that area. It's very difficult for me to grow into that area. But people don't see that. That becomes invisible over time. And it's a fascinating part of the game. It's to begin to illuminate that.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether, this is what I'm about to say is the direction you want to take this. If not, we can edit this out. But so the original, premise of all the work that we do is that there is an authentic self in there.
Yeah. And
that we mask it with an image or even a false self. Yeah. There's, it's called not just an image, it's called a false self.
Yeah.
Because it hides the real self.
Yeah.
And a lot of the original versions of the work that you and I do was to discover the diamond within, the authentic self. And the original premise of the human potential movement was that if we stripped away the phoniness, we stripped away the image, if we stripped away the false self, that the real me, the authentic me, would naturally emerge.
Yeah.
And I would naturally, this is an interesting thing to think about, I would naturally feel, right, loving, open, honest, right?
Yeah.
Right? I would naturally become a giver. I would naturally want to contribute. It would just be a natural process. I wouldn't have to think it up. I wouldn't have to, define myself, because it would flow naturally. Yeah. A lion doesn't have to think about how to be a lion. A lion is naturally a lion, or an ostrich, or you name it. A hummingbird. They are just, and so that whole idea that there's an authentic self, that if you liberate it, free it out of the constraints of, either the constraints of living up to mom and dad's expectations, or the constraints of, being a member of society that is, that looks good and is and all that, and so there's been a lot of discussion that's that's actually not the case. That's actually not the way that it is. And I know so I don't find my, the quote, life is not about finding myself, it's about inventing myself, about creating myself. Yeah. But that's not what the original version of the original people
sure.
who did the human potential movement, like Maslow, Carl Rogers and I, were all about, it was about discovering who's really there, the authentic me.
Yeah, and you'll know. I mean, we've worked together many times.
And
that's
so
not
for me, I'm
how I see it.
So because inventing myself then becomes an intellectual. It's a concept. It's an intellectual decision I make, right? And so if I decide, okay, well, I'm not going to be angry now. I'm always going to be kind. Mm-hmm. Now I'm always going to be generous. Now If it's an intellectual decision, right?
Okay, so
it's inauthentic.
It is, but but this is great because you'll know this is a hobby horse of mine, because that's very much not how I see it. I totally acknowledge that's where the human potential movement started, but it's never made sense to me. And for me, the secret is really hiding in plain sight, and you can help me with this, which is in the word authentic, because of your background. So, because authentic, the beginning of that word is AUTH.
Right.
And so author.
Not author. In Greek, it means self.
Right. Okay.
Autos,
yes.
AUTOS, and anglicized means self.
Right. Okay. But in English now we have author. We have authority. You see, and these kind of things are things where you have the power to write. If I'm an author, I'm writing, I'm creating. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to create something that's always positive, for example. That's not the point. But I am authoring myself. For me, authenticity is not about revealing. For me, it can involve revealing, but it's actually a creative process. And it's not just an intellectual pursuit. It has intellect, but part of who I am and who I'm creating, and the story I'm creating, is in how I hold my physical body, the emotions I allow myself to feel. And I talk about that in the book, because I make a bit of a joke of it, but it's got some element of truth in, which is, I was born in the UK in the 1960s, and so I have a stiff upper lip, and and there's as usual there's an element of that was what went on, but that doesn't mean I'm doomed to never show emotion. It does mean that maybe I didn't have some very strong muscles early on, but I can absolutely author that in terms of emotionally. I can author that. I can create that. I can experience those emotions, because like every human being, I do have language. I do have moods and emotions, and I do have a body. And I am the author of that. And that's very much where I come from. So for me, authenticity is all about a creative process, not a revealing process. But as I author, I am being revealing.
So authoring and authenticity are not the same thing.
But they come
in fact,
from the
in some
same
ways,
root.
but they're two completely. Just author and authority, yes. Yeah. Etymologically, they're related to the self, but that's not what autos means in Greek. Autos means self.
Right.
The same as the English word.
But then we have the word author. But then we have the word author. You see, but that works.
So just because it's etymologically related to autos doesn't mean it's the same thing.
Oh, it may not be the same thing. You're the master of classics. I'm not going to get into this with you. But in terms of it makes sense.
There's two ways of looking at what we're doing here in this work. Am I right? Am I revealing and discovering who I was meant to be, who my true self is, and all that, or am I making something up because I'm a blank slate? Yeah. And I make up.
It's turtles all the way down.
Myself.
Yeah.
The trouble with the authorship is for many people it's right. It's a completely intellectual process, and it's separating. For me, it separates them from allowing themselves to experience things that don't fit into that way they would like to be. So it's back to the power of positive thinking. It's back to trying to be somebody, right, that I think I should be, rather than be who I am. So
it's not, because the little glitch in the matrix there is you put the word should in. He's saying it's not for me. He said it's not a should, it's who do I choose to be, which is a huge distinction, as you taught me many years ago. So it's who am I choosing to be in that moment, and that can have a lot of range. But it's I think that is an important distinction. It's not, I'm not trying to, I should be like this because, that's different. I'm totally with you on that. But if I retain the ability to choose the impact, how I want to be impacting other people, the impact I want to leave on the world, for example, that for me is creating my identity, if you like. You can call it self-identity, but it's not a should. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that for me is a very, very that does take you way off track in my experience.
But, yeah, well, for me, a lot of people get trapped in that.
Oh, I'm sure. But a lot of people also get trapped in going to Bali for 6 months to try and find themselves. Good luck with that. You get trapped either way.
Yeah, maybe so.
That's what makes it fun. So one of the links I make in the book is around this importance that we've talked about many times of the distinction between content and context. And identity, or how you see yourself, is a good example of a context, if you like. It forms a way of seeing things. What as a way into that, what would your take be around how would you distinguish between those two things in this area, would you say?
Distinguish between content and
context, yeah.
Well, I always go back to the analogy of the desert and the rainforest.
Yeah.
And that it's a context. If you have a context, there are certain conditions, and in the rainforest, those conditions are hot and dry. In the desert, those conditions are hot and dry,
yeah.
which gives rise to, generates, allows certain content.
Yes.
The content that you see when you go to a desert,
yeah.
Sand and rocks and lizards and buzzards and so. And the rainforest is an analogy, an example of a context where it's hot and wet, and so therefore you see completely different animals, birds, insects, trees, and that if you take any content from the rainforest and plant it in the desert, it'll die. And if you take content from the desert and plant it in the rainforest, it won't survive.
Yeah.
And therefore, it makes it clear that context gives rise to content.
Yeah.
And that the content in any situation, is determined by the context. And so, then we can apply that to ourselves.
Yeah.
And to lots of different situations, but to ourselves, we each have a personal context, and the conditions. The simplest way that I know, maybe you know a better way to define it, but the simplest way I've always defined it is the conditions are my deeply held beliefs about myself, about other people, and about life.
Exactly.
And those conditions are what determines, what generates, what allows for all the different kinds of content in my life. The amount of money I make, the quality of my relationships, the level of happiness and joy, or sadness and unhappiness. Everything that appears in my life is all being allowed by, supported by, generated by the context.
Yeah.
And if I want something new in my life, right, and it means that's not there, it may mean that there needs to be a shift or a breakthrough or whatever you want to call it in the context.
Yeah.
And then if I have a context, money's a simple example. The amount of money that each one of us has in our lives is, if you take this seriously, is determined not by how hard I work or my education or whether I'm a good person or not or deserving. It is determined by the context that I have regarding money, which is all of the beliefs that I have around abundance, around what I deserve, around what I'm capable of, around what I'm worth. All those beliefs determine how much money I have. And I can work harder, I can get another new degree, I can change jobs, I can do all kinds of things. But if that context stays the same, the amount of money I have in my life is not going to change.
Yeah.
Right. And if I really want to have a significant shift in money or love or anything, it means having a breakthrough in the context.
Yeah, I think that's. I think this is, for me, this is again one of the fundamental, just so fundamental in terms of any kind of development world that you're working with, training, coaching, whatever. One that shows up for me, I mean, money, yes, but the one that shows up for me most often when I'm working for people is about relationships. They might be intimate relationships, but more often for me in corporate world, it's relationships with their team or their boss, or their, etc. And as an example, to use similar to your money one, if I have beliefs about, let's say about trust is a great example. I can't trust other people, or I can certainly only trust certain kinds of people if they're older than me, or if they're younger than me, if they're the same sex as me, or they're different sex than me. But I've got these kind of beliefs that are essentially like a bit like a box. And then it goes back to this interdependent world. Now suddenly I'm operating at a level in the world where I need to be interdependent. If it's very difficult for me to go on a training course and try and put new content in about, okay, so you should do this and you should do that, and this is another tip, and here's what your favorite guru says you should do, and here's your content provider, and it doesn't work. Why? Right. Because it might start for a little while, but you can't keep it in there because you're operating context that men can't be trusted, women can't be trusted, whatever it is. It won't let it. It just eats it up. Like that famous saying, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's the same kind of thing. It's determined by that. And it's amazing nowadays, especially because, content providers, so many content providers out there. But what always makes me smile about that is that's not going to have people sustainably change their life.
Right.
The thing that's going to have people sustainably change their life is actually being able to illuminate the context that they're living in. And that's why I talk about coaching, the kind of training we do, which is you're not so much a content provider as a context illuminator or revealer of context, because that opens up far more possibility in terms of if people are really going to sustainably change behaviors ultimately and grow. So it's a huge piece for me. And the way forward into it, you said one half of the equation, which is context generates the content. But given that, the reverse is also true, which is the content reveals the context. And that's critical because context by definition is invisible. You never see the outline of your box. And the only way...
You can't see desert. All you can see is the content that's desert. And
then you infer
the context.
Context. And that's I think, one of the biggest things that coaches and our kind of trainings do is we support people to really get honest about what is the results, for example, the actions they're taking, the results. What does that reveal? So if I'm in a relationship, if I carry on with my example, where... we're working in silos in our team, let's say, which I hear a lot. There's lots of silos. Okay, so that's what you see. The content is people are working in silos. What therefore must be the operating context? But this is where human beings are very sneaky, and this is what I use in the book, the analogy of keeping the mirror clean, because the temptation for human beings is to go, okay, but we're only working in silos because of head office. It's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with us. It's because of head office. It's because of the exchange rate. It's because of this. It's because of that. And now you're not letting the content do its work, which is reveal the real context. You're just kind of keeping the mirror blurry, coming up with excuses and justifications for working in silos. And so a big part of our work is to kind of keep cleaning that mirror so people are able to really see, like you said in your back to your desert example, that's sand, that's a rock, that's a palm tree. It really is. And so therefore, what is the inference? But human beings, we don't like that. We like to kind of come up with stories to justify why it's there.
Yeah, my favorite stuff on that is to always have say to people the phrase "based on results." Okay, yeah. So you say, Right. Yeah, my goal, say to people, how many of you want to have more money in your life, right?
Yeah.
Than you have right now? And you say, well, actually, it's not true.
Yeah.
How much money do you want to have in your life right now, this moment? Well, count it all up. Count all the money you have in your investments, your property, your, blah, 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 your bank, your piggy bank, your wallet. That's how much money, right now, it fits in your context.
Yeah.
And until the context changes,
that's a very confronting mirror for people.
Right? Until the context changes, it's going to be about that. It might change a little bit, but it's not going to change dramatically unless there's a change in context.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of great stories to tell about.
It's a powerful stand to take, and who knows?
Based on results.
But based on results, exactly. And the trap, of course, therefore, is often that even when people get that, and it is a hugely powerful, productive place to stand, which is the results I have in my life, I'm generating it with my context, is the most powerful place to stand. I think I've discovered. But the trap is then, and you'll know this as well, which we both run into it in our work, is people begin to link their value with the results they have. Well, I've got $20 in the bank, so that means something about me. You've got $200. You've got $1 million. And we start, as human beings, we're very good at it. Again, our identity becomes linked to the results that I have in my life. And that is one of the key reasons why people don't want to let their results reveal their context, because they think they are their results.
Right.
And now that's one of the biggest barriers to really taking that look at what are the results telling me. They don't tell me who I am, but they do tell me where I am. They do tell me
tell me the context.
Where my context is. Now, if I'm willing to make that distinction, I have a context, I am not my context, then I've found over the years that really allows for people to really use that content in their life based on results. But that's the big trap in that for me. They don't want to do it because they think it means something about them. Doomed.
Right. There's a collective context too,
Say more about that.
Well, a simple example it's a little outdated these days is the story of Roger Bannister and the breaking.
I love that story.
Breaking the 4 minute
love
mile.
that story. Yeah.
Right.
Great
so
story.
I don't know. So I've studied this at length, and if you go back to before he did that, there are all these articles in scientific journals which proved scientifically that no human being would ever run a mile in less than 4 minutes because it was physiologically, lung capacity, blood, blah, blah, heart capacity, blah, blah, blah. And in the decade before he broke, there were multiple tries to break the 4 minute mile, including a lot by Bannister himself. Like in the year before he ran it in under 4 minutes, he and several other of the top athletes would run in 4 minutes and 1 second, 4 minutes and 2 seconds, over and over. And so finally Bannister said, it must be impossible. And several other people said, and there were all this proof.
Yeah.
And then he did it.
Yeah.
With the support, of two people who were pacing him and pushing him and all that. Within a year, one of his main competitors, who had kept on running it in 4 minutes and 5 seconds, within a few seconds, and over had banged up against it and not been able to do it. Within a few months, he broke the 4 minute mile himself. And now there are 1,400 athletes, right?
Yeah, that's
around,
a great example.
Who have run the mile in under 4 minutes. And one of them ran it in Lord have mercy, it's like 20-something seconds under 4 minutes.
Yeah.
The world's record is now way under 3 minutes, 30-something seconds.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a physical barrier at all. It was a context barrier.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Context barrier. The context was so powerful that the world's top athletes couldn't break through it until somebody did, in which case the context shifted.
Yeah.
and what was impossible became possible.
Yeah.
So I love that story
That's a
because
great story.
because it it shows what can happen in somebody's life.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have a breakthrough in a context like this, and what was impossible is now possible.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a. And the reason I love that example, it as well, is you're dealing with human endeavors at a very high level already. So these people were already pushing themselves. It wasn't like they were sitting around going, "Oh, this is going to be difficult." They were really striving to do it. I mean, these were the best athletes of their day, and they were really striving to do it, and they still couldn't do it while that context was in place. And then there's that story, isn't there? Within about 6 months, four or five people had done it. Just boom, boom, boom.
And high school kids now have done it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's another interesting piece about context and content. For me, it's really fundamental and really does point to the big difference in the kind of work that we do. An interesting development, though, I've seen over this, and especially in the last few years, is how people are saying, okay, we get it about this thing about context, but I'm not the only context. I live in a context, which is true. We live in the 21st century. That's a context. I live in Asia. That's a context. Might live in Singapore or Indonesia, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of operating contexts. And one of the developments I've seen, which I think is holding people back increasingly now, a lot of people understand this, is that they're prone to giving away their power to the operating context or the system. You often hear it called the system. Now, that's not to deny that culture, for example, as an example of context, exists. So Asian context, Asian culture, fine. But what I notice is what remains paramount to me is if I'm working with an individual or a team within a company, because of course a company is a context, it's so easy to give my power away to the bigger context. Marcus, I'm only like this because I work at company X.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Marcus, I'm only like this because the context is Indonesia or Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, that is it's very pernicious in a way, because it sounds great, because everyone knows that culture and context exists, or culture exists. But what it overlooks conveniently is I can still choose how to respond to that context or culture. So, for example, just because I'm, let's just say, Indonesian, it doesn't mean I'm locked into certain ways of being and locked out of other ways of being. It's not true at all. Not every Indonesian person is the same, for example, and I can choose to act in accordance with my culture. I can choose to act outside of my culture. That's perfectly possible for me. But I do see that as something that's increasingly dangerous to people, because they're losing their power. They're giving their power to the bigger context in that sense. But any thoughts on that? Anything you've seen in that area?
No, except other than that, like all contexts, it's largely invisible to people. I mean, it's something that's for many people, it's completely invisible. They're taken for granted completely, and that this is who I am, and this is the right way to be, and so that to step outside that is uncomfortable, is risky, and takes somebody like you or somebody who to point it out. People just like it's not easy for me to see it's easier for you to see my context than I see it. So but I hear what you're saying. So sometimes to be really productive means I'm going to have to not just do what everybody who is Indonesian or Malaysian or Singaporean or American
but you see it play
does,
You see it play out at a smaller level too. And my other favorite story is, Marcus, I'm only like this because of my boss. I'm only like this because I work at this company. So I don't want to it's not just about countries and areas of the world. It can be smaller than that. And it's because it becomes a great excuse, which is because of my boss's context. I mean, they don't use that word, but that's really what they're saying. Because of who my boss is, ... And then it justifies me maybe not being honest, for example.
Right.
You know, and then I've got a great story. But actually, the results, the content is I'm not being honest. Now that is, in my world, it's because of how I'm showing up and what I've decided about being honest or not being honest is driven by me and my operating context rather than this boss. Because I promise you, this boss has the same context and then someone else sees him and they're perfectly willing to be honest. And it's not driven by the external, it's driven by how I see that boss or that human being.
So what do you say to people? Say, then you see clearly if you're going to be more effective, then there's a risk you'll need to take, huh? Or there's a new awareness you'll need to put into action, or...
Yeah, so if I get into that situation, I'll say, so, well, let's work it through. So what do we know right now? I mean, it usually start in this kind of situation. It will start with, well, I'm not willing to be honest with my boss. And Marcus, no one's willing. Well, no one's often, you know, no one does it. Right? You can't do it with him. I go, okay, great. So let's just say, what do we know right now is that you're not being honest with your boss. Okay, great. Now, what's the consequence of that? Where's that leading? I'm not saying you should be. That's not my role. I don't know them. I don't know, you know, I'm not saying I'm telling you should be honest all the time. That's crazy. But let's examine that. If you keep doing what is the most comfortable for you right now, will that produce the results you say you want to produce? Now, if they say yes, I go, okay, right, we're even talking about it. Right. But if they say no, we go, okay, now, if that's true, what else could be possible? Where else could you go to achieve that? And so then it begins a story, you know, an exploration, I should say, in terms of what could be possible. And then there's lots of tactics that you could put in place with that. One last thing I want to say in this area, though, is this, because the other thing I really see this played out increasingly so in the world is I assign you a context. Well, you're American. It's like, okay, so now what? It's like, you know, so you're American, or you're a man, or you're a woman, and so people are so quick to do that nowadays. For themselves, but also with other people. And then I put them in a kind of a context that I've assigned for them. And that's true of everybody in that set or in that context, if you like. Well, you're American, so you're bound to be loud, for example. Or you're British, you're bound to be repressed, you know, which is all great. And, you know, there's the old story. There's always some truth in cliches. Otherwise, that's why cliches exist. However, again, once more, I'm stuck. If I assign that it's true for everybody in that set, it might make life simple, but it very often, let me put it this way, it very often stands in the way of me being productive because I've put everybody in that set in the same way. And now I'm kind of doomed because it's that context that sets the frame for everything that I'm able to go on to produce. I would produce better results, but you're American, therefore you're loud, and so I don't have time to speak. How convenient,
right?
You know, and so now that's those kind of situations I see getting played out so many places now.
Really? Okay.
So thank you, fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed that, especially the bits where you have some disagreement.
Thank you, my pleasure, my honor.
Really enjoyed
Thank you very
that.
much for including me.
No, it was great. Really enjoyed it.